Welcome to Chapter 2. This is a big deal. We have the invention of the piano to talk about. I have some fun facts to share with you and a little bit of technique information and historical information about the 1700s in the piano world. This was a big turning point. You know, earlier we talked about some of the ancestors of the piano, which were important: the harpsichord, the clavichord, even the pipe organ in churches. But they could not do what the piano can do. And so in the early 1700s, an Italian instrument maker named Cristofori invented the pianoforte. If you know anything about Italian, it literally means soft, loud. Sometimes it's also called forte piano, loud, soft. It means the same thing. And his instrument could make all the dynamics, the full range. And it was controlled by the keys. It was touch sensitive. So this was just huge for piano players because we could connect with the instrument more. We could control dynamics. We could play in an expressive way. And I like to think of this as kind of catching up with the other instruments who could already do this. If you think about the context, think of a violin or a flute or even a singer, and they can add this phrasing and expression to their music. And now, with the invention of the pianoforte, we could do that too. And so you're going to see how composers respond to this and sort of how the style responds to this too. 1720 is the year that the piano was invented, but of course it took a few decades for it to really take off. We had to, develop the instrument, build the instrument, sell it, distribute it. So think of, maybe another 50 years before Mozart was playing on a piano instead of a harpsichord. Classical piano music, 1750 to 1820, is this particular style that I'm talking about today. But people refer to classical music covering all styles as more of a general term. If you really want to be specific, classical piano fits into this time, late 1700s, and it fits in to the order of these eras: Baroque, classical, romantic, modern. And we'll talk through each one a little bit. You might know some of these composers who were important in the later 1700s. You already heard me play this. You know Mozart. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He wrote many important piano pieces, piano concertos. He wrote operas, he wrote symphonies, and he was a child prodigy. He wrote a lot of things early in his life. His Turkish March is a very famous and popular piano piece. So later today, we're actually going to learn a Mozart piece that I think you'll enjoy, and we'll talk about some of the technique that goes into that. Another composer, here's the music first. See if you recognize it. I think you've probably heard that before, and it's by Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. You remember Johann Sebastian Bach from the previous century. Hey, this is one of his sons, bringing us into the next generation and using the instrument in a new way. Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, he's known as CPE Bach. He is known for using an expressive style on the instrument and using more of these dynamics that, like I said, we're able to use on the more modern instrument. Another name you should know is Franz Schubert. He wrote some piano music, and even more importantly, he wrote many songs, 600 or more songs for piano and voice. I think this is important because of homophonic music. Do you know what this means? One melody plus accompaniment, homophonic. It's a response to what we had earlier, polyphonic, many voices, homophonic, one voice. Piano music is a lot like voice and piano music. Do you know what I mean by that? We have a melody and we have an accompaniment. And when we are doing that, it requires that skill of balance and kind of managing two different things on the same instrument. And we are going to talk a little more about that later on. So now that you know the term homophonic music, how does this apply to piano playing? What do you need to know? What do you need in your skill set for this? I think this managing one hand differently from the other hand is what throws everyone off. It has to do with balance, so that would mean playing one louder and one softer. It might also be articulation. One hand staccato, one hand legato. We're going to see that later today. Or it might be rhythm, one note longer and then a faster rhythm in the other hand. So this requires practice, and it's one of those things that you can build into your fingers and then have it ready when you need it. So I'm going to teach a few skills to you today, and then when we get to our Mozart piece, you'll see how it applies. Okay? We're going back to our C pentascale. So you know these pentascales now. You've been through all the major keys. I'm placing my hands on a 5-note C scale, and I'm in a higher octave. The only reason is because that's the octave we're going to use for our piece. So just place that with me. And find your notes, connect your ears, connect your fingers, check your posture. All right, we're good. So you've got that ready. There are 3 different things I'd like to go over, and these are warm-ups that you can just use again and again. The first one is quarter notes in one hand, eighth notes in the other hand. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, so I repeated the same note twice in my left hand for each note. 1 and 2 and so forth. That results in a couple things actually that will pay off. Do you notice that your right hand is smoother, heavier, more into the keys? Your left hand is lighter and bouncier? You'll see. You already know what I'm about to say about that. Switch. See if you can do it the opposite way too. Left hand holding out the quarter notes and right hand bouncing eighth notes. Here we go. The result, when you get good at that, you're doing 2 different things with your 2 hands, but you're getting a lighter, quieter sound in one hand and a heavier, louder sound in the other. This is where our dynamics and balance and bringing out the melody, most important thing. That's where that will come through. Here's our second thing I'd like you to try. We're playing quarter notes in each hand, but and you can mix and match the order, you can work on whichever hand needs the work. But the result is that you're able to lift one hand lighter, freer, shallow type of sound, while you're playing the other one deeper into the keys. Anytime that we're looking at a classical piece of music, think of Mozart, think of Haydn, think of Schubert, these important composers from the 1700s, when we look at their music, we always find the melody, we always bring that out, and we always keep everything else light, small, quiet. So when you hear that word balance, when you hear that word voicing, this is where it's coming from. So I would spend some time on that, move to different scales, make that part of your daily warm-ups. When I teach Mozart, I always refer to his operas because I think they are so expressive, so amazing, so gorgeous, and I like to tie that into what we do on the piano. Remember that just because classical music is more simple and light compared to what came before it, it doesn't have to be blank. It's not devoid of expression. It's just a new musical style. So when you get into this melody and when you learn Mozart piano music, I want you to think like a singer. I want you to find that range, bring out the high note, take a nice big breath before you start. I love this little piece by Mozart. It's a rondo, it's in C major, and it's a perfect example of what we've been talking about today, which is melody accompaniment, homophonic music, right? And Mozart is such an important name, you have to play some of his music. This melody it walks through C major chords, and it is lovely, it's pleasant, it's bright. But here's the challenge. It has a lot of articulation, slurs, staccatos, and a lot of phrasing. You know, think of this going to here, and this here, lift, and stuff like that, detail. And I think I always come back to this in Mozart because we lift off of the slurs, we crescendo repeated notes, and of course all of this applies. The right hand melody is the most important part, but the left hand accompaniment needs to be supportive too, and I'd like to look at that with you. Find your C major chord, and I want you to find out, are you able to play it small, quiet, close to the keys? This is a skill that we're going to come back to again and again in classical music. Notice that I'm staying in contact with the keys. I'm not lifting my hand, I'm not lifting my fingers. And even more than that, I'm actually overlapping the sounds. This is referred to as finger pedaling. Maybe you've heard of finger pedaling before, but I'm not using my foot on the pedal, but I am creating sort of an overlap in that accompaniment just to soften all the edges. If I don't do that, you hear the difference, right? And actually that more distinct sound is what I don't want. It makes it distracting from the melody. So as much as I can soften that up, that's what I'd like you to try. See if you can do it. Adding the melody on top. And you can hear vibrant, bright, full of life in the melody. Quiet accompaniment. This takes practice. Working on one at a time is really smart, and slowing it down when you put both together so that it's not left to chance, but instead your brain and your focus is controlling what you want to do and making it happen, you know, and that comes from your technique and your experience with music, of course. One last thing about this piece, the title. Rondo is about form. A rondo begins with a refrain. Think of a chorus in a song. And then as we move through the piece, you'll have other parts, other sections, and then it comes back to the refrain. And then another section, and then back to the refrain. This is a rondo. And it's actually the same form as chorus, verse, you know, in a song that you might know. So form in the classical time is important. We have sonata form, ABA form, and here we just talked about rondo form. When we're thinking of how the piece is built, how it's structured, the symmetry of it, this is where we really see it come to life. So the rest of this piece can be found in the song store, but the first excerpt you can work on here with me today.